Ahoy friends, welcome to Building the Alpha Dory. I'm Dan, and this is a ongoing video series of building an Alpha Dory. I got a real interesting question just recently on the comments section, asking for a comparison between the Alpha Dory and a big Banks Dory as far as well, I think the question was mainly about seaworthiness, but I might as well talk about kind of a general performance comparison a little bit as well. So yeah, that's what this video is going to be about. So here's a photo of Centennial up in Portland, Maine. This is the boat that I'm currently sailing. It's a Banks Dory, 20 foot, close to 3 feet depth in the midships from the bottom to the rail, and even higher than that in the ends, creeping up on 4 feet, not quite, but so she's got a lot of freeboard. The other thing with this boat is it's heavily ballasted, which would be pretty typical for a Banks Dory working on the banks, because they'd ballast it with fish. So you drop the boat in empty, light, fish, and hopefully fill the fish well between the parting boards. And so when you raised sail and headed back for the schooner, you had a full well of fish and a nice stable boat for sailing in. This particular boat has close to 800 pounds of ballast in it, in the bilge, locked down by floorboards. That's in lieu of the fish. This boat also has a centerboard. It's a replica of an 1870s dory, Banks Dory, which sailed across the Atlantic Ocean with Captain Alfred Johnson at the helm. Sailed into Liverpool, left Gloucester about 2 months previous. And, the boat made it. It was capsized twice during the crossing, but it came back up on its own the first time, I guess, and the second time he lost his square sail and basically had to wait for another wave to bring it back up. But that was in the course of a couple storms, so yeah, it's a super seaworthy boat. So Johnson was a fisherman on the banks, and he said the storm that capsized. Actually, now that I think of it, he only capsized once. He went through 2 storms. That was it. But anyway, whatever. So yeah, he said about the storm that he capsized in, it was the most dangerous seas he'd ever been in. And this is like after a career of fishing. This is in his later years that he's saying this. So, and it makes sense. It was North Sea, off about 100 miles off of Ireland, I guess, when he hit the second storm, which is the one where he lost his square sail and capsized. But Banks Dories are known for their seaworthiness. So I guess the question was maybe to a sailing version, because I'd say if you're rowing, well, the other thing with seaworthiness is the ability to go against the wind. If you've got sea room, I'd say a Banks Dory is more seaworthy, and if you're rowing, I'd say it is. But if you've got a lee shore that you have to stay off of, then a Swampscott Dory has less freeboard. It's got lower sides. So we're comparing the Centennial, which is 20 feet, to the Beachcomber, which is Alpha Beachcomber, which is 21 feet. So you can see the sides, especially the ends, but also midships is significantly lower than in the Banks Dory. So this story doesn't need as much ballast to be stable. And if you're in a situation where you need to row to stay off a beach or to avoid a headland or something, or sail, especially in a light boat, then I think the Alpha or Swampscott Dory type would be preferable because it's got more power to carry sail, especially if we're talking open boats, because like I say, Centennial is all decked over. Now, if you've got a Banks Dory that's an open boat that's being used recreationally, you're probably not going to be carrying around, 700, 800, 900 pounds of ballast. The other thing, if it's an open boat, then if you do capsize, you don't want your ballast to take you to the bottom. So probably the wisest thing to do with ballast if you're in an open boat is to go with water ballast in the form of water bags or jugs, so that if you do, if the worst thing does happen, if the boat goes over and fills with water, the ballast isn't going to pull it to the bottom on you. The water jugs will just float out of the boat, and then you can bail it out and hopefully get back up and going again. So it's a lot of, kind of depends. The other question, I guess, I've been doing all my sailing without a motor on Centennial, and this is the Alpha Beachcomber that I built 10 years ago or so. This didn't have a motor in it either. And this gentleman who was talking to me was also asking about the seaworthiness of both of these boats comparatively in sort of dangerous inlet type situations, which, like I say, if I'm going to be near land and I've got to avoid the land and all I've got is oars and sails available to me, I'm probably going to choose the Alpha Dory if I'm in an open boat unballasted. Now, if I'm in Centennial with all her ballast, that gives her a lot of power, because it gets her down on the lines and gives me a wider water line and a lot of power to go to windward. So at that point, a light Alpha Beachcomber versus Centennial with 800 pounds of ballast in her bilge, well, maybe I'd think about going with Centennial at that point. Here you can see the depth of Centennial's hull, and when she's in the water, that white streak is just kissing the water. So there's a lot of boat in the water. Plus, as a Banks Dory, which is a little bit unusual, Centennial has a centerboard as well, which will help her claw her way to windward. So the thing with a light Banks Dory is it really doesn't stiffen up and carry sail until the rail is right over close to the water, because then that's when the side of the boat, the side gets down near the water, it really stiffens up hard. But at that point the rail's right on the water, and if you tip a little bit more, well, you're taking water into the boat. Also, when you're at those sort of angles of heel, your centerboard, if you've got one, is becoming somewhat less effective. The boat's tending to slide sideways a bit. And if you're sliding sideways and dip the rail, then the rail will scoop water and fill the boat even quicker. So Centennial, overcomes that with the deck. First of all, with the 800 pounds of ballast, I've never put a rail underwater. I've taken splashes and waves over the rail, when, on the low side, but I've never actually driven that rail underwater. That's how stiff the boat is. Now, I haven't been out in a hurricane either. Like I practice good seamanship, and I don't go out in dangerous conditions, but that's how stiff the boat is anyway. And if you do drive that rail under, well, there's a deck there. As long as you get those hatches tied down and lashed down, you're going to take in a minimal amount of water. Yeah, sure, the hatches could leak, but they're going to leak very slowly compared to an open boat that's got its rail underwater. Here's the original Centennial. You can see how heavily she's ballasted, maybe even deeper than I've got mine at the moment. The other thing with Centennial is you can fold the mast back and lash it down. That was supposedly how Alfred Johnson rode out a number of the storms. It was also a feature that you could drop his mast and fix anything that went wrong with the rig while he was out there. Because he was out there for 2 months, so he wasn't going to be climbing the mast to replace lines or run lines through blocks that were up the mast. So he had to be able to access the entire rig while he was out there. So that's an aspect of seaworthiness. It's not something you're going to use when you're close to land, though, when you're trying to navigate one of these dangerous inlets that this gent was talking about. So the other thing is, as far as seaworthiness goes, if you're really, the question is like, which is more seaworthy? Well, they're both incredibly seaworthy boats, both designs. So, if the difference in seaworthiness, whatever that is, between the two different designs is kind of the margin of error that you've got between make or break, where you need that tiny bit of extra seaworthiness, you're probably like in such bad conditions and so far out of your comfort zone that at that point it's going to be a real heck of a ride either way. Either of these designs, either of these boats, I would not want to push to their limit, because honestly the sailor is going to fail before either one of these boats is. You're going to get fatigued, you're going to get beat up, you're going to make a mistake that's going to ruin your day, that's going to put yourself and the boat in danger, far before you actually come to the performance edges, push the performance envelope as far as seaworthiness on either of these boats. And I guess a breaking inlet, these difficult inlets is, that's getting into that range. Obviously, like checking weather reports, checking sea states, checking conditions, wind direction, all that before you go out. Now, if you introduce auxiliary power that's reliable and that's, bulletproof, it's not like some little trolling motor that's hung off the side on a wimpy bracket that's going to fatigue and break. If you've got something that's really bulletproof and reliable, and that's got enough power to push the boat against wind and wave, then things change a little bit. In that case, the bigger boat, which is the 20-foot Banks Dory, it's just larger all around, higher bow, more displacement. That boat's going to be more seaworthy. But if you're talking about rowing and sailing, especially rowing, a lot of times the sort of seaworthiness limit is when you lose control of the boat, when it gets so windy that you can't row against the wind, or when it gets so windy that you can't sail and you have to go into a sort of survival mode. So, like I say, I'd probably list, Centennial with the deck as the most seaworthy. Then I'd go with the Alpha Dory, an open Alpha Dory, because of its lower windage and its greater initial stability, so power to carry sail. And then the least seaworthy in terms of going against a wind would probably be an open Banks Dory, though it's not a bad thing. The who posted the question also mentioned something about decking over an Alpha Dory, and that's definitely possible. You wouldn't have the below decks capability that you do with like Centennial, where it's actually a marginally usable. I've got bunks below, and I can sit down there, get out of the wind and whatnot. The Alpha doesn't have enough headroom to do that. But if you did a light, and the darn thing is the details. So it depends what the deck is and how it works and what the openings in the deck are like. But if you did a light deck on a beachcomber that wasn't top heavy, and that would keep the water out when she heeled, it would be an even more seaworthy boat. The deck on Centennial definitely interferes with the ability to row Centennial. So Centennial's even worse rowing than, say, any other big Banks Dory. Any other big Banks Dory has the windage, but then Centennial has the ergonomics of sitting on the deck and moving the oars, and it's just, it's not ideal. It's not as good as sitting down on a thwart in a Banks Dory and really hauling on the oars. Now I can row it okay, but it doesn't row as well as a open Banks Dory. So that's a huge trade-off, and I've got to keep that in mind when I'm sailing the boat. I'm very conscious that my ability to row it against wind or tide is pretty minimal. So I need one of the two going with me if I'm going to row successfully. I either need to be with the wind or with the tide. I've had Centennial and the Alpha Dory that I had out in pretty similar conditions. I've sailed Centennial in more. Well, actually, I'm not sure I'd say that even. I've sailed Centennial in some pretty short, steep small chop, like 2 to 3 foot, white capping chop. And same with the Alpha Dory. Both of those were off of Gloucester at various schooner races. And then I also have taken Centennial out to the Isle of Shoals a couple times, which is 8 miles off the coast of New Hampshire, Maine. This photo is at Gosport Harbor after the remains of Dorian, the tropical storm, blew through. So I felt, once you get away from the land with Centennial, you feel a lot safer because then you're not worried about being blown ashore. Not that she couldn't claw her way off the shore, but once you get out there and sailing, you just it's so much less concern about where you're at, so much less stress. You're just out there enjoying the day. Here's a shot from Dorian blowing through. We went out sailing. Earlier in the day this day. This is getting on towards dusk. We'd been out sailing quite a bit earlier in the day before it kicked up as bad as it is here. But we were out in 6 to 10 foot swells. Fairly steep, nothing breaking, nothing white capping. The swells were being made over the horizon, and this blew in, through the course of the day. But that same day, the 60-foot ferry that runs back and forth, which is a big old fishing boat, basically. And then also the Lannon, which is oh gosh, well, there's the Leighton, which is a steamship ferry that runs back and forth as well, which is probably closer to 80 feet. Both of those boats were canceled on the day that we went out sailing, and we had no issues in Centennial. She was slowing down as we were coming up the seas, and then the bow would come out, and then you'd sort of sigh out of the wave, and then you'd be racing down the other side. But like I say, they were not breaking at that point, so they weren't terribly steep waves. They were just big waves, and you could feel the boat slowing down. And I've been out in the Alpha Dory in those same sort of conditions, and no issues. So like I say, they're both boats where if you're pushing them to the edge of their performance envelope, you're probably so outclassed and so overwhelmed that you never should get there, basically, is what I'm saying. Yeah, I would say, so if you're choosing between the Alpha Dory and a boat fitted out like Centennial, which is fitted out, the design is to cross the Atlantic Ocean. It's not to mess around in little backwaters and go to the beach. And it can do that. It can do that if you use it in the right way, but that's not what it's specifically designed for. Whereas the Alpha Beachcomber is, a direct descendant of these working dories, which were made to carry a load, be easy on and off the beach, and just as far as an all-around pleasure boat, the open boat, the open Alpha Dory, is a lot more versatile than a decked boat of any sort. And once you put a deck on something, you either need a footwell or a standing well to be down inside of and do all your work from there, or you got to go scrambling across the deck to go do stuff, whether that's dropping the anchor or doing anything with any sort of hatches on the boat, or doing anything raising sail, unless now I've got all the lines to Centennial, all the lines to raise and lower sail led back to the cockpit, but you still end up having to go up on the deck, up to the mast, and sometimes even around the mast to untie stuff, to unfurl things, unhank things, untangle lines if lines get fouled at all. So you're going to be up on that deck. And that's something else to think about. How secure are you? What's your footing like? If you're up on a boat that's a fairly light boat to start with, and then you're up on it rather than walking along the bottom where you're down inside the boat and you don't have all that weight up high, so it's not tipping side to side. And this is another example of the Alpha sort of in her native environs, which is where she's really best at home, is exploring little creeks. And don't get me wrong, it's a boat that was designed to also race off of Marblehead Harbor, which is more or less the open Atlantic Ocean. It's called Ipswich Bay or Massachusetts Bay, but it's open on 180 degrees basically to the open Atlantic, and there is a pretty good chop that whips up afternoons coming up from Boston on a southwest, dirty southwester or whatever. So these boats are able to handle a fair amount of sea and chop and whatnot, but they really sort of excel in shallow water, backwaters, and just kind of low-key enjoyment as opposed to pushing them to their limit. And either boat is fairly capable of carrying, say 3 passengers in a fair amount of comfort, and a fair amount of room. Both the Alpha and Centennial, especially with her deck, starts to get a little bit crowded with 4 people on board. The Alpha, you can do it. And certainly Centennial or a Banks Dory her size with 4 without the deck, 4 people would not be crowded. But it kind of depends what you're going to be using the boat for and how you want to use it. Well, hope that I addressed some of the question. I just thought it was a real cool cool question, something to think about anyway. And if you guys have any thoughts or comments, feel free to leave them below. And definitely 2 very interesting boats, both of them with rich histories along the coast of Massachusetts for sure, and well worth building and using. Well, thanks for stopping by building the Alpha Dory, and I'll catch you guys in the next video. See ya.